Hi, my name's Nicole, and today we're going to be joined by Suzanne Galbraith and John McLaughlin from Aon. Well, thank you both for joining me today. Very happy to have you here. So for those who may not know, tell us a little bit about Aon and what you do.
Okay, good afternoon, or nice to meet you, Nicole. My name is Suzanne Galbraith, and I'm a multinational client director in Aon's Health Solutions practice. So really my role is supporting multinational companies in the digital economy space, helping to set up their global insurance programs for their people, and that might be part of new country expansion, but also making sure that they've got the correct insurances for their permanent, but also for their gig economy workers as well. Over to you, John.
Thank you. Good to meet you as well, Nicole. My name is John McLaughlin, and I'm a partner in our human capital practice. I work with companies across the globe of all shapes and sizes on different aspects of the people strategy linked to future-proofing workforces, their attraction strategies, their retention strategies, and ultimately helping employers understand how they can stand out in a crowded space.
Lovely. And so one of the big things facing the mobility industry today is the talent market. So just give a brief summary of what does the talent market look like in the mobility sector and other sectors today?
Yeah, if I look at the talent market last year, it was very much defined by that term, the Great Resignation. And everyone talked about the Great Resignation at some point or another throughout the year. We sort of look at the Great Resignation as an outcome of what we actually termed the Great Convergence. Right? Increasingly, companies are after the same type of talent, think digital, think tech talent, to power increasingly similar business models. Think digital or think tech again. We ran a survey last year where 73% of respondents said that talent shortages were actually the biggest challenge of 2022. Back when we look back at last year, I think companies responded to that challenge primarily through pay. Is that necessarily sustainable? Probably not, because we've seen spiraling cost bases. We're going into a year of record merit budgets across a range of industries, but those are things that are probably unlikely to continue. Overall, I think if we're looking ahead a bit, the market is changing. Economic uncertainty is starting to bite a little. Turnover is slowing, and salary growth is actually doing the same. After those likely record merit budgets in early 2023. Is that necessarily true for every type of talent? Not quite. So certain skills in particular remain immune to that slowdown. When we look at the tech layoffs that are all over the news, who is actually being laid off? It's not necessarily software engineers that are getting the cut, it's the support functions around them. So looking at the market overall, we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown now, in particular against the factors that we saw in 2022. However, not for every type of talent. And I think that's particularly relevant if we think about the mobility industry. Digital and tech talent will form the basis for our likely digital first business models, and this is where competition will remain high, and that will have an impact on our ability to attract and retain our talent. Suzanne, anything from you?
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to John's points there, I think traditionally in the digital economy space, we really saw two types of workers. You had those that were the permanent staff, and then also those that were perhaps more in the gig economy space. And that's actually the main reason that many people were attracted to that industry. And people went there for the flexibility, the ability to work as and when they want. However, there's been a recent change with EU legislation, which is actually recognising the employment rights of many of these gig workers. And this has really changed the landscape of the digital economy workforce. The new proposed rights mean that many gig workers have the right to paid leave, pensions, workplace accident insurances, and it also changes the category of what those workers are as well. So to John's point, that there's been a lot of layoffs, but also a lot of staff are also being made permanent as well, which really does change the cost basis of any business model as well. And furthermore, many mobility companies and sectors are now challenged with not only managing the overheads of the insurance costs for the pensions, the accidents, for their permanent staff, but also for these gig workers as well. And that really, I think, changes the overall landscape of how these businesses work and their business models as well.
Lovely. So what type of talent do these new business models need, and how do they retain and attract this talent?
So many companies are looking for digital talent, software engineers. I think specifically in that market, it is very competitive because they're not only recruiting from other digital economy companies, so their software engineers might be from banks. The talent comes from right across the market, and even sort of from retail as well, anybody that's got software engineering skills that works in that. I think the main sort of difference that we're seeing when the change of the EU legislation and the workers' rights is usually about getting permanent gig workers, permanent delivery drivers, which is a very specific and niche role in many different countries. And I think in terms of like hiring from different organizations, often it gets quite difficult to make sure that companies are competitive in terms of pay, but also benefits as well. If organizations in the digital economy space tend to hire from other large organizations, often they find they fall short if they don't offer a minimum level of life insurance or a competitive pension or even medical as well. But pay, I think, also becomes challenging too in following on from the pandemic. And John, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, like when we think about attracting and retaining talent in this market that we find ourselves in, we actually need to understand what the competition is doing. Part of the problem when we think about digital or tech talent is that we're competing with everyone. So when we want to understand what others are doing, we need to benchmark ourselves pretty much against everyone as a result. You know, so thinking through our employee value proposition, thinking about our benefits offering, we need to take all of that into consideration. So what do banks do? What do other types of tech firms do? What do manufacturing organizations do? You know, like we need to go fairly broad on the benchmarking side to understand what we need to do. Interesting here, last year, I think it was Vodafone that wanted to hire 7,000 software engineers. So like a great show of ambition, but it's exactly that skill set, you know, that we've already referred to that is in such high demand. And maybe that is why a Vodafone, for example, doubled down on flexibility of where you do your work as they sort of like revamp their broader employee value proposition to stand out in that crowded market.
Lovely. And so why is digital and tech talent in such high demand?
Yeah, I think it's actually a fairly simple supply and demand question. You know, so none of our systems, so education systems or anything of the like, are set up to provide or produce enough talent to power digital transformation journeys of existing companies, nor the ambitions of our newer born digital breed of companies. You know, so there's just such a high demand for that type of talent in the market that our current particular education systems are just not set up to meet just yet. You know, when we think about sort of like the reason why, you know, like digital business models offer exponential growth potential. And I think we can extend that same analogy to talent. You know, hiring digital type of talent offers, again, exponential growth potential for us as organizations. Interesting again, from one of our surveys from last year, was that 68% of our sort of like respondents to that survey said that they fear losing key digital and technology skills among departing employees. And of course they do. You know, I mentioned it before, you know, like we're competing with everyone for these skills. They're highly transferable. You know, as a software engineer or a data scientist, you can thrive in a Google or a HSBC or a Nestle. You know, so like in a way, if you have these types of skills, you know, the world is your oyster.
Oh, brilliant. And you touched on this briefly there. How does understanding your competition really draw in such high level talent?
Suzanne?
Yeah, I think overall, understanding what the overall total rewards package looks like for the competition. And that, especially in the digital economy space, that can vary from market to market, country to country. What you offer in Ireland might be actually quite different from the UK, even though it's just across the water. So I think really understanding what's the minimum level, so what's the baseline, and then understanding what you need to do to support employees through a hyper growth stage as well. Often one of the biggest pressures that companies in the digital economy face is going from startup mode to a more established organisation. And how can they support? Often there's a lot of pressures within the organisation, stress, high levels of workload, and particularly if they're moving towards IPO as well. And in that phase, often understanding it's not just about compensation and benefits, it's about what you can do to support the overall employees through that space, I guess, as well, offering additional benefits that might not necessarily be support from benefits like life assurance or medical, but making sure that people have the right services around them to be able to perform their jobs correctly. I think probably as companies move, understanding, I guess you say, to draw high-level talent, as they move to more established organizations and they hire talent from larger companies, understanding what these companies offer, what's the level of pay grade and incentive plans, what does it look like in terms of benefits and pension as well. John, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Like the only thing I would add is that, you know, like we already know, you know, like what do the established tech firms offer? You know, like they offer highly competitive pay packages. You know, like there's multiples of bonus payouts for good performance if you work in a tech firm. There's big long-term incentives. You know, so understanding what they do will help us to create a compelling counter offer. You know, it doesn't have to be the same. You know, like how the makeup of the offer is structured can be different. You know, but understanding the competition and what they're doing forms the baseline for us to make good decisions around this. The next question, of course, is, do you understand your target candidate? But yeah, that's another one.
Brilliant. And so why is it important to have data intelligence in your people strategy? What do you think the benefits of this bring?
I would say that what we want in our lives is not static across our lives, you know, nor is it prescribed to the stages of our lives that we find ourselves in. You know, it differs for everyone. Why I go work for company A may be very different, or maybe for very different reasons than Suzanne going to work for the same company. You know, understanding what drives and motivates people allows us to create and deliver let's call it differentiated employee value proposition aimed at the individual in an organization. Data underpins all of that. You know, if we have the right type of understanding of employees, of candidates, we can start to build what we call evergreen employee value propositions today. You know, these can evolve alongside changing needs, desires across our workforce. All we need are smart data models. And if we learn anything at Move this year, is that smart data models are a reality already today, you know, be that for mobility as a whole or for how we deal with our people. Yeah.
So you said that you will be joining us at Move 2023. We're very excited to have Aon there. So what are the things you're going to be touching on and what are the topics you're going to be talking about?
So we're really going to be looking at the ever-evolving world of risk in the context of how we can make companies make more informed decisions about the overall risk profile of their companies, but also in the context of people and what that means. In the digital economy space, there's forever changing legislation which impacts the businesses, the status of their employees, and what that means in each country as well. There's regional changes, EU legislation, but also in countries, there's also regional decisions about the status of these status of the workforce. So we're really going to be focusing on what that means for your people risk, your people strategy, and how you can support this going from a growing company to a more established organization.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Very excited to have you here, and we're looking forward to seeing you at Move in June.